This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the Antoine Dupont of website builders.
For good and for bad, there's nothing quite like the Six Nations. For 5 weekends over February and March, the average Joe or Jane in the street cares about rugby. Pubs are packed as punters pour potations down their throats. The title counts, sure, but the Six Nations is quite unlike any other competition anywhere in the way that each and every individual match truly matters. Losing a pool game or a league match is quickly forgotten, but the stench of slipping up in the Six Nations stays for a long time. And the glory, the warmth, the adulation of winning never quite goes away. There's no other annual tournament in any sport where hundreds of years of history are so keenly celebrated every single week on every single fixture, every round conjuring clips from before anyone watching was even born. And so, when one team declares that year's Six Nations a chance to rebuild, it never goes down very well. It's well-worn territory for the coach at this point to expect a fresh weekly batch of backlash blown into their face. And yet, in 2024, we have a funny old Six Nations, as 3.5 of the 6 teams find themselves in the neighbourhood and looking for a spot of its world-famous rebuild. Where Italy have rebooted a rebuild that's been going on for quite some time, and Wales missing 18 of their first choice 23 from 2023 makes the process currently underway feel pretty obvious. Steve Borthwick's England on a road slightly less clear. So, with 3 games now giving us 2 scrappy wins and 1 profoundly odd loss that started really well and went really badly, what is Steve Borthwick and his coaching team trying to build? When can we expect it to come together? And can they feasibly prove any challenge to Ireland and France in the final 2 games of the championship? England's 2023 was a weird one. An up and down Six Nations was followed by a decidedly down set of warm-ups before finally getting it right at the World Cup, finishing the cycle off as the world's 3rd best team. Many will point to the kind draw they had, but the facts of the matter are, right? England were good in that World Cup. Tactically and physically excellent, devising 6 exceptional game plans and finding a way to scrape a win in the game against Samoa when the chips were down and an upset was on the cards. Even in the eventual loss to South Africa, England were fantastic, the better game for most of the match before things went rather ox-shaped in the final few minutes. That campaign was frankly a kind of masterclass of World Cup prep, the kind of thing we've seen Warren Gatland deliver at countless World Cups now. It's the only time in the international calendar where as a test coach you get proper dedicated time with your team, months to drill your tactics, devise strategy based on the opponents you know you're going to face, prep for games, and perhaps most importantly for England last year, prepare physically. Borthwick brought in former Springbok conditioning coach Aled Walters, who he'd previously lured over to Leicester, and built an England pack to peak twice. Once in the opening game against Argentina, and a semi-final again against the Springboks. The warm-up games were throwaway, forgettable, so England threw them away and forgot about them. The men's Red Roses entered the games tired because they were doing fitness work all week, designed to pay off down the road, once they got to those 2 big games. England flourished thanks to a lengthy preparation, exceptional fitness, superb analysis, and bespoke game plans drilled over months to win specific games against specific opponents in specific circumstances. In the Six Nations, Steve Borthwick, instead, gets about 2 weeks with his players before the first match and a few days to prep each game, rendering what they did in the World Cup almost impossible to replicate. And so, instead of trying in vain, Borthwick has rebooted this side, starting afresh, aiming to put in place repeatable, buildable foundations to turn England from a side capable of stepping up into one capable of being the best team in the world in a few years' time. England's personnel might have changed less than Wales, but they feel like a very different team to during the World Cup to me. We saw it instantly in their opener against Italy. This is England's longest passage of play from the opening stages, and yet it's so reactive. Every decision is being made on the fly versus the more drilled approach taken during the World Cup. After a few phases, once forwards had the chance to find shape, England called 2 waves of attack and used them beautifully to get roots on the outside, which is a horticultural nightmare, an ancestry conundrum, but a rugby-based delight. Forward sets a simple pod to play off the following phase. Nobody in the boot here to link up means there's a disconnect in England attack. They can't quite provide a full-on threat, but instead Mitchell spies a disconnect in the Italian defence, and Snipes can only blocking the offload to Underhill, which could have caused real havoc. The original English Osprey plays 9, with the Italian D slow. Ford takes his time to assess and hits Stewart. There's another simple phase waiting for things to occur, and then they do. Mitchell considers dinking behind, but then gets a call from the short side and looks to exploit the space through Freeman. Nothing comes, England reset, and Ford tries to dink over the top, which is covered by Yuan, who sends England back into their own half. It's a sort of heads-up rugby that your dad always calls for, and it's a work in progress, but it's definitely changing and starting to happen. England went through 5 phases, or more, 11 times during that game. A few of them were drives for the line from 5 metres out, but most of them were similar situations to that. The team trying to react to the Italian defence, an air of Ireland about the way they aim to call shapes and plays on the fly, all based around what the opponent's defence is doing, trying to react. Their first try of that game, finished by Elliot Daly, is a product of the same shape, the same play they scored off against Australia a few years ago. One phase smash up, but then a fly off pulls it out of the back to a secondary playmaker who has a number of runners all aiming at the number 13 here, in this case Brex, looking to overload them, allowing said playmaker to select the pass and open the hole. Freeman gets through and offloads to Daly, who dives over to score in the corner. England's first half was composed on the fly, filled with stock plays, with ideas they've used before, because they're trying to build this Ireland-style system. There's a loose 1-3-2-2 structure they adhere to, but most of those groups are merely building blocks for Ford and co to play with. If you compare how England played there to the Japan game in the World Cup, the match against the most similarly standard opponent, I'd say, the changes start to become evident. Over that full match, England played 5 or more phases without kicking it away just once, leading to the bizarre try eventually scored by Courtney Lawes. And even that was only 7 phases. Instead, spending 80 straight minutes using a bespoke set of kicking tactics to squeeze Japan, kicking medium distance, allowing Japan to take it, but in no space, the defence swallowing them up. Set before the kick, giving the Blossoms attack no time to take shape, slowly turning that pressure then into points as they choked them out. Instead of focusing on opponent weaknesses, the Six Nations, England are attempting to build their own strengths. There was an element versus Italy of not quite knowing what new coach Gonzalo Quesada was going to do tactically, and so they led into a much more kick-heavy strategy in the second half once they worked out how Italy were playing and saw this was a proper game. But the trends have continued throughout the tournament on both sides of the ball. Trends shown perfectly in their brilliant, superb first 20-odd minutes against Scotland, and in the brief moments where they got back in the game much later on. That second try, scored by this man, is a perfect example of the reactive attack they're starting to build. Cam Redpath, on at 12, has assumed defensive captain responsibilities for Scotland and spots the shape setting on the far side off Ford, with Freeman jogging off to go and find shape, and so he calls for teammates Jones and Russell here to reload on that open side, covering the other side of the ruck, because he's numbered up here. He's fine. Redpath is so fixated on managing the far side defence, he fails to look straight in front of him. Feyu Aboso sees Redpath's hips turned inwards and wraps around the ruck. Late. Hiding himself behind this forward pass so he isn't even in Redpath's peripheral vision until it's already too late. Exploding onto the ball and hitting a perfect angle to glide over. All from one individual read, the call of one guy rather than some flashy framework put in place earlier or a game plan they spent months working on. Feyu Aboso backing himself to get on the outside before going over unopposed. However, that wasn't the only time Feyu Aboso expressed himself to this England side. For that week, he had also headed to Squarespace. Keen to prove he's properly English rather than a Welsh lad hiding in white, Feyu Aboso started building a website of his favourite English things. He loves English things, able to create full pages so simply dedicated to all his favourite bits of Hertfordshire. Look at different cups of tea that he loves looking at with just a few clicks, integrating storefronts to sell top English merchandise. Just sources for the tea. Videos of his favourite English moments, the bloody dragon being slayed by St. George. Photos of cool English things like all his new teammates. In no time at all, Feyu Aboso had more English things on his website than in the entire British Museum. And if you want to do the same and build your own patriotic website dedicated to how proud you are to be from your new nation, please head to the link in the description, right? And what you can do when you get there, you can use the offer code SquidRugby and you can save some money on that brilliant website that I know you're going to make because it's so easy to do. Honestly, you'll have a great time. You'll have a superb time just like Feyu Aboso did. England started that Scotland game totally on their own terms. From the first line out, they run this superb move, bringing the ball wide, prompting Kinghorn to come up and join the line, meaning Duhan van der Merwe heads into the fullback position, sweeping round, penduluming to cover him, only for Ford to hang a bomb exactly where Duhan should be. Scrum off Ben White, the only Scottish player there, scrambling. Daly wins it in the air, but before England can capitalise, they're pushed into touch. But it's a promising move, and from the next set piece, they run an even better one. Off a scrum on the far side, Ollie Lawrence runs straight at clubmate Finn Russell, who, knowing his threat, bites in on him, meaning Tuipulotu can't drift, forced to watch these two runners planting their feet. Slade bowls him over, isolating Jones as George Ford takes the ball. Similar to that generic move you against Italy and Australia, he has 3 passing options, dependent on which option Jones makes and whether Duhan comes in to support him. Duhan doesn't, and it allows Ford to instead fix Jones himself to put Daly into the gap. He draws the fullback to put Lieutenant Furbank running a brilliant line over for the most glorious try of the century that he's scored. He is a good World War One. It's brilliant, dynamic, and instead of built around unlocking specifically Steve Tandy's Scotland defence, it's looking to give George Ford options on attack, different ways for him to open the door and ways to isolate the 13. It happens to be Hugh Jones, but it could be anyone. This is the core of what Borthwick is looking to build. It sounds like a UKIP slogan, but everything either side of the ball should be done on England's terms. As play resumes, Kerr clears, and from the line-out, Scotland are looking to run a pick-and-go play, something they'll go on to have huge success with in the second half, and Wales tried to run the previous week, sending Dempsey straight at George Ford with only forwards and a winger in support. Scrum half White nowhere to be seen because they're not going to play this way, they're looking to pick and go. Except Underhill and Earl do an exceptional job of flooding the space, able to get a huge double hit on Dempsey and stop Scotland's momentum before it's even begun. The ruck is then messy, they disrupt it, and Carlson is forced to come in and play 9, allowing Ford around the fringes to get in his face and prompt a knock on. England win a penalty off the scrum and remain in total control until Earl spills this ball shortly afterwards. However, when he does spill that ball, there's a scrum, Scotland get a free kick, and Russell pumps it along, allowing England to finally use the kick battle prowess, a major factor in selecting George Furbank over Freddie Stewart for the first time. Slade, the biggest boot in the team, has dropped to fullback, and seeing that they're going nowhere, not finding the chances, Scotland simply carry in, only for Slade himself to then put enormous pressure on the following phase, eventually gathering the ball himself 70 metres further upfield from where he kicked it. This attack comes to nothing subsequent, as a theme on Saturday, but we can see the squeeze starting to come on, the defence starting to work. England this championship have completely changed this defence, completely altering it from the World Cup, bringing in another former Springbok coach in Felix Jones and tasking him with implementing the system that took South Africa to 2 straight World Cup victories. And here's the thing, right? Elements of the Springbok system have become incredibly widespread since 2019. Every centre now defends like Lukanyu, an aggressive press before falling into a hard drift on the outside. Quite a few teams, most notably Ireland and Wales, have adopted the optional scrum half sniper. The concept of catch-up defenders and so on that they popularised have now become standard parts of every single defence. And yet, teams who have tried wholesale to copy South Africa's manner of bloody flying up and smashing you lads, most notably Italy under Franco Smith, has generally failed miserably, horribly, and conceded a lot of tries when exploited very easily because Jacques Nienaber and later Felix Jones built and calibrated this system around South Africa's particular strengths. Aggression, huge fellas, and a willingness to let their players die on their feet, run out of gas because the bomb squad strategy meant they could replace them the split second they did, tracking all GPS stats as the sole means of why you would replace a player. England are probably the only other international team in the world with the raw resources to make the wholesale Springbok system work. In Maratoge, they have one of the very few players capable of playing the Etzebeth type role. Someone aggressive yet athletic enough to do this kind of stuff. Rushing out a line to pressure the first receiver, usually a forward, totally disjointed in the line. Attacks thrive off fast ball and forward momentum, and the shooter's job is to take the oxygen out of the attack, to deny them that launch pad to play off, absolutely smashing the first guy up whilst the rest kind of sets behind. This is a fantastic example, though England do give away a daft penalty, which is a whole other issue, but it starts here. Atoje absolutely fires up on Gareth Thomas, catching him 5 metres behind the gain line, scragging him, cutting off in support, so Wainwright has to come in as well, which wasn't part of the plan, and it leaves the Welsh attack forced to adjust last second on the back foot, reshuffling backwards with the English line set so perfectly. They rush up as a line fast. Daly starts incredibly wide, knowing the midfield here will drift across if it's needed, but the front foot defence blows past the Welsh decoys with ease, Slade putting huge pressure on Tompkins, who has to rush the pass, looping it behind Rafael. He's eventually dropped to ground 15 metres behind the gain line. England then rush up again and catch Mann further behind the gain line for a third successive phase before Williams decides enough of this, let's go and take the daft penalty they gave away a moment ago. If England had held their discipline, they would have pushed Wales back 30 metres into a position from which they're likely going to just kick it back to them, almost certainly to around the position Wales first received the ball. This aggressive defence is tantamount to a turnover, yet it's undone by a moment of stupid indiscipline, which kind of sums up where England are at right now. It's a lot of things working, then something silly just undoes it. The opening stages against Scotland, they forced plenty of handling errors and turnovers. Sam Underhill, in particular, was exceptional all game, and the defence is really smartly calibrated to let the likes of Ford slip in and make subtle little rips, using even their weakest defenders, like Ford, in smart ways. Yet, every so often, they're still over-eager, allowing Winnett, say, to break through here, or being caught out easily by Gorbisi for this try, eventually scored by Tommaso Allen, but frankly, these are almost identical issues, mostly found in the wide channels, to the ones the Boks were having in 2018 as players adapted to that system. And it took about a year Interestingly, right, considering so much the pressure's coming out wide, the one aspect of the Springbok defence we aren't seeing so far is a distinctive use of the wingers, who like to shoot inwards from wide positions. They're still starting incredibly wide, the English wingers, allowing everyone else to spread equidistant, so the pressure feels piled on that much greater, like there's less space in the line, the forwards spread out wider than they are in most defences, but Daly and Freeman are tending to stay in wide positions instead of coming in to cut off attacks. The box system hasn't been cut and pasted wholesale, but rather adapted to the pieces that England have on the board at the minute, so I wonder whether this will remain a permanent change, or if they're using Daly's sheer rugby IQ as a safety blanket on both attack and defence, and whether, as and when Faye Weboso, for example, earns a start, they may start to have him play the exact role Colby and Aronson run so well for the Springboks as a reasonably similar player. Because there are plenty of tricky bits, and a lot of them come in personnel. Ollie Chesham is an exceptional player and doing a fantastic job of filling in that solo blitz, but there's a reason that England have left Maro Itoje on for the full 80 minutes in all 3 games so far, and I wonder whether they have the raw resources to replace him or Chesham if they're knackered or injured, where the box can call on 4 more world-class athletic units. If Etzebeth drops off 10-20%, England are forced to keep Itoje on, even when he starts to tire. And likewise, if England are starting to adopt an island-style attack, where it's reactive to how the defence is setting and they're calling shapes on the fly from a huge playbook, a key component in the Green Machine clicking so well in the last 2 years has been every backline player getting comfortable calling shapes on the fly instead of just the 10, as it was at the start of the Andy Farrell era. And it feels, at the minute, a bit like Ford and Slade are the only 2 members of the first-choice England backline experienced and comfortable managing an attack. And even then, 90% of it seems to be coming off Ford. Elliot Daly and George Furbank are useful other options in the meantime, but it feels like quite a few eggs might need cracking in order to get the likes of Ollie Lawrence, Freddie Stewart and Tommy Freeman up to speed, playing in a completely new way that they've never dealt with before. Where the defence is really close to working, I wouldn't be completely confident that their attack is going to click this Six Nations. Because there's nothing like this Grand Old Championship, that might sound like the end of the world to some England fans, but to my eye, what we're witnessing doesn't even feel like a work in progress, but rather a stopgap. England kind of half feel like they're trying to build an island-style attack where an infinite playbook is plundered phase on phase to find shapes and structures that can undo whatever the defence is doing at that moment at incredible speed, and yet, from the 3 games we've seen so far, it's the same plays being used over and over, often wrong without anyone knowing their lines, leading to handling errors, and the structures are so much wider. They're not sucking players in, they're not looking for the gaps, they're running their players and hoping the defence adjusts. And they're often not playing to defence, they're much more generic than the situations they're being put in. And I think a big part of this is because, in the place of an attack coach right now, England have Richard Wigglesworth, a man hired initially not to run the attack, but as a kick strategy coach. And frankly, so far the Six Nations, England's kick strategy has been really strong. They were safely on top for the first half at Murrayfield, second half in Rome, and the full match against Wales. And it took them to 2 wins in 3 games, which is not a bad start. It's the second part of Wigglesworth's job, however, the promotion to control the attack, that feels like it's maybe a bit of a stretch, not to question him or his ability, but rather it makes me wonder, and this is pure speculation, I have no source on this or anything, whether England might be looking to bring in a new attack coach, perhaps someone who's leaving their current job after the Six Nations, as they look to continue to wed their Springbok-style defence to an island-style attack. In 2024, we have 3.5 teams in this gorgeous old championship stuck in the phase of rebuilding. And where Wales are clearly in a short-term paying part of the process, France beginning a bit of a slump, and Italy showing proper promise while playing anyone but Ireland, England have reached the half-time report with more of a question mark on their cards. In that first 20 minutes at Murrayfield, a 20 completely controlled by the defence and kicking, we saw a pretty complete blueprint for what they're trying to do, minus a few drop balls, quieting the crowd and hitting a 10-0 lead after 15 minutes. And yet, in the following hour, we saw just how much work they have to do. Scotland are a team nearing their final form, or possibly even in it, and it's showing. They're a team mature enough to withstand and come back from swings and momentum, and in Duan van der Merwe, they have a player single-handedly capable of producing those swings. From the moment Scotland nabbed that second try, a feat of bullshit the like of which very few players worldwide would be capable, England struggled to reassert themselves on the game. Passes were dropped, confidence went down, and discipline started to slip, with the kicking game that had been going so well in the first half reversed. Suddenly England were on the defensive and their varied kicking game turned irrelevant as they found themselves playing on Finn's fun terms. Russell, not Smith. They fell away and they lost the game. This Six Nations, so far we've seen flashes of the finished product, but it's rare they hold together for very long. Borthwick has always been a data-driven coach and one happy to learn lessons the hard way, essentially throwing away his first few games to Leicester in order to work out how the squad he's inherited was best set up to play. The 2024 Six Nations has not been thrown away, far from it, but I suspect Borthwick is hoping, much like those World Cup warm-ups, it'll prove forgettable if they can put it all together further down the less clear road on which England find themselves, and maybe produce a few big wins along the way. Sneaking past Wales was a start, but I wouldn't be surprised if, similar to South Africa in the World Cup, he's gone all out in targeting Ireland, in analysing Ireland, and looking to get everything going. Next up, at Twickenham. England fans, be they Premiership diehards or pub locals loving their annual burst of rugby, may be in for an up-and-down edition of the one tournament where every single game truly matters, but it may yet mean that in a few years' time, they're in line for some new clips to be added to those hundreds of years of history wheeled out every February and March when this sport matters to Joe and Jane in the street. Thanks for watching that. I hope you really enjoyed it. This is one part of an ongoing. We've got a whole bunch of stuff coming between now and the next round. So there's this on England. We've got one on Italy, France coming in the next couple of days before the weekend. That's a hole. That's a goal, rather.
That's a hole as well.
It's a hole. It's a big hole in the schedule.
It's like in golf, you've got a hole, and in footy, you've got a goal.
And in rugby, you've got H. The letter H from steps. Third, next week, we've got one on Wales. Finally, a few people have been asking about that. Looking in particular at one shirt in Wales that we may have looked at and passed in
21.
Rugby. Looking at who should wear the 21 jersey for Wales. Many discussions to be had over that. I hope you've enjoyed that video. There's plenty more around the channel. Please have a look. The podcast is also back, looking at the 2007 World Cup in some detail. Next week, we'll be doing the famous game.
Yeah, New Zealand versus France from the 2007 World Cup, with all of the tries, all of the tackles, all the incidents that happened in it.
All of them from Thierry Dusatois.
Yeah.
All of them just him on his own. So please keep an eye out for that. That's all around. Just go and look for the Squid Rugby World Cup retrospective. We'll see it there. Otherwise, we'll see you very soon for Italy against France.
And more golf. No, rugby. Sorry.
I love watching rugby in a pub.